Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Oh boy, I have been hesitant on doing an unholy rant on the prequels because where do you begin? There is so much that you can complain about, so much that you can pick apart, so much that you can rant. And this movie is no different. I know that there are plenty of prequel fans. I know there are plenty of people who grew up on these films, and so they probably won't like these videos, but I'm sorry. I have to be real with myself. And for the record, this was the first Star Wars movie that I saw in theaters back in 1999. I was about 10 years old, and even back then, I thought this movie sucked. Right off the bat, the opening crawl was the dumbest thing that we could do. Trade Federation is some of the first words that you read, and you think to yourself, what? Isn't this a Star Wars movie? Isn't this a film that should be about laser swords and spaceships and missiles and fighting and explosions? Now look, I'm not saying that Star Wars is not allowed to be deeper, that Star Wars is not allowed to do more serious things, that Star Wars is not allowed to go for it. I would love that if more Star Wars movies did that. But the problem is that when you watch the rest of this movie, there is no seriousness, there is no matureness. This film is strictly made for kids, strictly a family-friendly type tone, and you can't have it both ways. You can't have this opening crawl talking about protesting recent legislation, taxing, huh? What? Why? Why is any of that not only in the opening crawl, but why is any of that in this film if you weren't going to take the movie more serious? I don't get it. This is where we get introduced to Qui-Gon Jinn, Liam Neeson, and a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Ewan McGregor. When you think back on the idea that Liam Neeson was in a Star Wars movie, that Ewan McGregor played a young Obi-Wan, just the idea of that, just the thought of that sounds great. And it's awesome. And I think people romanticize the fact that these actors were in this movie, because when you go back and really watch them, they're bland. They're boring. There's nothing interesting going on with them at all. I know the Jedi are sort of devoid of emotion. I know that there's no relatability to the Jedi characters hardly at all, especially in the prequels, but my God, I don't have a sense at all of who Qui-Gon Jinn is as a character, how he feels about things, or could pick any of his words out of a lineup because it could be said by anyone. Same thing with Ewan McGregor. Boy, if the new Obi-Wan TV show can show us anything, it tells us that these actors, these prequel actors, could have been epic, could have been way more memorable than they already were if they were given better dialogue and directed by a better director, because Ewan McGregor here, he's just a one-note type of dude. He's just a guy who does everything Qui-Gon says and just goes along with it. A great Robin-like sidekick. But thinking about what we should have gotten from a young Obi-Wan, something to show his youthfulness, something to show Obi-Wan in a much younger light, but I don't get a sense of any of that after these characters fight off a bunch of CGI droids, which for 1999, yeah, they look horrible. That's where we get introduced to Jar Jar Binks. Now, before I go on possibly the biggest rant of this video, Jar Jar Binks is voiced and performed by Ahmed Best. He was physically there on set, acting out all of the things that you see Jar Jar doing. And I know at the time he had a lot of criticisms, a lot of attacks on him as a performer, as an actor. He took it really hard. He was even suicidal over this. He's talked about it in various interviews, how much this broke him. everything, the fallout that came from the Jar Jar character. I know that George Lucas talked about how Jar Jar was supposed to play an even bigger role in the subsequent sequels in this trilogy. And I will say this, I feel bad for Ahmed Best. I feel bad for what he had to go through because I could not imagine what that level of attack could feel like and what mentally he had to go through dealing with that. But this performance is bad. This character is horrible. I can't stand listening to Jar Jar Binks' voice, listening to the way he talks, listening to how irritating he is every time he opens his mouth around Qui-Gon, constantly in his face, trying to get involved, trying to help, but he's tripping over his own feet and just being annoying as hell. But it's a kid's movie, right? And this character, I understand that Lucas felt like they need to have a goofy sidekick because the two Jedis aren't funny or don't have any wit about them. So fine, sure, but you went too far the other way. You went too hard on the goofy jokes that I never laughed at Jar Jar once. If Jar Jar made me laugh even 2 or 3 times, I probably would scale back on how much I hate this character, how much I cringe and wince every time he shows up on screen. There are so many points where I want his character to be killed off, where I wanted him to get blown up in that end battle, especially when he somehow almost single-handedly defeating all of these droids. It's terrible. If this was a cartoon animated film, I would say this is too goofy. Never mind live action. Talk about taking away the stakes. Talking about making the Sith look not intimidating at all. Or at least the beginnings of the Sith coming back into the picture. But let's move on because I could go on for hours about just this. The CGI backgrounds and the CGI creatures, and especially during the underwater sequence, I think that's the most egregious moment in sequence that has CGI, the overindulgence of CGI. I know George Lucas wanted to be innovative. I know he wanted to push the technology to a whole new level. The original Star Wars films, still to this day, the effects look really good and holds up in some ways. And back then, for the budget that he had and for the time period that those movies were made, they should not look as good as they do. And there's some great magic going on with those original 3 films technology wise. So I get that he wanted to push it even further. I get that he wanted to bring technology and really blow audiences' minds. We're talking about a time period that's following movies like Jurassic Park and Independence Day, films that took blockbusters to a whole new level. He wanted to be a part of that. It's just too much, too fast. 1999 was not the time to have entire CGI set pieces. And when you see the behind the scenes of some of these actors having to perform in green screen or blue screen and nothing being there at all for them to interact with, it must be maddening. You must feel like you're going crazy. Reminiscence of Ian McKellen, who on the set of The Hobbit was losing his mind. He was going to have a nervous breakdown over the fact that he's not acting with any real life tangible characters or objects. It's hard to blame some of these actors for why their performances are so bland, because of the environments, because of the set pieces that aren't really there, because of all the CGI alien type stuff that they're not really interacting with. Queen Amidala is a very interesting character that gets introduced here. The characters do end up saving her. She's played by Natalie Portman. It's interesting to see how much Queen Amidala is more on the mysterious side in this film because of the getup, the makeup, the wardrobes, the way that she presents herself in the public as being this overly regal and royal like character. You hear stories of how maybe she was a bitch to Keira Knightley, who plays her decoy, which I love that idea. I really do. It's a great idea to have her have a decoy. The audience doesn't really know of it. Keira Knightley does have a very similar look to Natalie Portman, so that casting makes sense. And having even us on a rewatch try to pick out which moments are Natalie Portman in the makeup and what moments are actual Keira Knightley in the makeup, I think is fun. We wind up on the planet Tatooine, which is important to Star Wars lore, and we get introduced to Watto, who I think I always found Watto annoying when I was younger, but over time I've warmed up to Watto. I find him a lot more amusing than I ever did before, and in comparison to Jar Jar Binks, Watto is possibly the most likable character in this movie, or the most fun character to watch in this movie. But the 9-year-old slave is young Anakin Skywalker. Yes, we have child slaves in this family-friendly, fun kids film. And Anakin Skywalker is played by Jake Lloyd, who previously I remember seeing in Jingle All the Way just a couple years before this. And he wasn't that good of an actor in that film. But again, he was younger. He was probably like 6. He's even worse here, though. And this is another sad case, another sad story where Jake Lloyd has grown up and he has talked about how he was bullied in school and people crapped on him for this performance, made fun of him, and it sort of pushed him into a life of doing some not so great things, and he had his own run-ins with the law and just not good. I actually feel bad saying the bad things that I'm saying right now about Jake Lloyd because he was a child actor, and it's not a child's fault for how good or bad they are able to perform certain lines of dialogue, weird dialogue. We are still talking about George Lucas dialogue here. We have grown adults who aren't able to do anything substantial with that level of writing. So why am I blaming a 9-year-old? I shouldn't. It's not his fault. But it's also in the hands of a George Lucas to just cast a better child actor. Cast a better actor who maybe could handle this, or who could deliver this type of stuff, who could be believable as a child version of Darth Vader, which, now that I'm saying that out loud, why are we having a child version of Darth Vader? Why? I know a lot of this prequel trilogy was solely based on the idea of let's meet Anakin Skywalker and follow his journey into darkness. Follow how he eventually becomes Darth Vader, one of the greatest villains in movie history. And that idea on paper sounds great. Doing a prequel trilogy about the fall of Anakin Skywalker sounds like the most badass thing that I would want to watch all day, every day. But the first film, we're starting off with him at 9 years old. That sounds like a horrible decision, and it was a horrible decision. There's so many reasons why this should not have been the case. There's so many reasons why Anakin should have been older. He could have easily been the same age as Padme. Padme's, like I said, about 15 years old. Why isn't Anakin that old? Why isn't he a teenager? Why isn't he somebody who is older so that maybe when we get to an eventual turn where he goes bad in the third film, he's at an age that makes sense of why he's doing what he's doing. It's not coming from a place of ignorance or immaturity. No, we're seeing him as a young child, so he's coming off as goofy, he's coming off as annoying. He has this scene where he meets Padme and asks if she's an angel, and it is not only cringy, not only hard to watch, but to know that these two characters actually end up together, to see Natalie Portman talking to 9-year-old Jake Lloyd, knowing that in the very next movie they're going to become a couple. Whose idea was this? I almost feel like this setup of a love story is the worst introduction to a love story in movie history. Find me one worse. And that includes Luke and Leia, brother and sister, kissing in the original trilogy. So Qui-Gon believes that Anakin is the chosen one. He has this feeling about him. And at first it seems like Qui-Gon's wrong because Anakin eventually turns dark and becomes evil and destroys the Jedi. But if you think about it in retrospect, Qui-Gon believes that Anakin will bring balance to the Force. So the fact that Anakin helps destroy all the Jedi until there's only a handful left, and then there is a Darth Vader for them to go up against, that actually is bringing balance to the Force. Qui-Gon, from a certain point of view, he was not wrong about Anakin being the chosen one. He just didn't say which side he was going to be on. Qui-Gon makes a bet with Watto for the pod race. If Anakin can win the pod race, he can get his freedom. And the pod race scene, since most of this movie is as dull and as bad as I think it is, the pod race is seemingly a bright light. It's seemingly something that is fairly easy to watch compared to everything else. It's some of the best CGI special effects that are in this film. So I will put this in the positive column. Not a lot can be said for that. And because Anakin wins his freedom, this means that Anakin's free, right? He's no longer a slave, but his mom has to stay. So his mom will spend the rest of her life as a slave, and he has to just let that happen. Qui-Gon could have probably done more to save his mom or break his mom out or go back at some point and rescue his mom. Maybe Obi-Wan could have done that. It's pretty messed up the way that Anakin's mom has to stay on Tatooine and to know her fate. This just seems wrong. And I don't know how else to put it. The senator of Naboo, Palpatine, is trying to slowly corrupt the government. And I don't know if this is supposed to be a surprise or if this is supposed to be something that I'm not supposed to realize. But even as a child, I knew that Palpatine was the Emperor. He looked like him. He sounded like him. Because to me, it's obvious. It's very obvious that Palpatine's the villain, that Palpatine's doing things. And it almost makes the Jedi characters that much dumber, that they don't see what he's doing coming. Aren't Jedi supposed to be smarter? Aren't Jedi supposed to be able to see things in front of them? Yes, the point of where the Jedi are at is that they are so comfortable, they are so high in the clouds that they don't realize what's right there in front of their face. I get the poeticness of that. But when you see characters like Mace Windu and Yoda and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, characters that we should think are smart and cool and badass, to look at them and think that they're all dumb, I don't think that's the desired outcome that Lucas was looking for. Darth Maul, holy shit, I've gone this long without even talking about Darth Maul. I think Darth Maul is one of the coolest things of this movie. He has one of the most unique and badass looks to him, character design wise, makeup wise. I wish we got more of him. That goes without saying. He has this badass three-way fight with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and between how good the lightsaber fight is, the choreography, the way how they all three bounce off of each other. But John Williams' score, Duel of the Fates, is one of the most epic scores of all time. This is the most praise you'll probably hear me give this film, is how cool this looks. Unfortunately, I watch this and I also get confused on how does the power of the Jedi work. You see, for example, Obi-Wan leaping high 20 stories or however high he jumps up to make it to certain platforms, and I'm like, I never saw any Jedis do that in the original trilogy. Darth Maul ends up killing Qui-Gon, and this too is disappointing because not only is Liam Neeson a guy who should be in more films, Star Wars films, but this is it. It's a one and done for him. And out of any of the characters, he felt like the main character, at least more so than even Obi-Wan. So Qui-Gon being taken out by Maul and then Obi-Wan finishing it off, I didn't get much of a character progression for Obi-Wan. I never saw the moment where Obi-Wan was like, all right, I'm ready to step up. He just kind of does. There's no growth. There's no, okay, I'm ready to step out on my own. It's just like, oh, well, he's dead now. So I guess now I have to fight him and I'm just able to defeat him. Maul gets cut in half. I know that he ends up getting robot legs and I know that he ends up coming back. But for me, this was the end of Maul. This was frustrating. Every time I watch The Phantom Menace, I am frustrated because there's so many what ifs. I can't watch this movie and just go for the ride. I can't watch this movie and just go along with whatever's on screen. Every time I watch this film, I always think about what should have been done different. I always think about what I would have done different. I always think about, man, this shouldn't be there, that shouldn't be there. And that's probably the biggest disappointment about The Phantom Menace. So guys, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Star Wars The Phantom Menace? Do you agree with me or do you disagree? Oh boy, I'm ready. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later!